that kind of gives you an idea. And then there would have been loopholes in the wall and the whole thing. And then right here is what's left of the East Barracks. This was one of two barracks inside the fort that are absolutely identical. Well, I say they're identical. The West Barracks, for whatever reason, didn't have a stone extra addition on the end of it, but it did have a wood building on the end of it, the same size as this, but there's post molds in the ground over there. So the stone ends on that building, but it would have been another additional room. And if you look at the other barracks, when you walk around it, you'll see that on the end, there's a fireplace that protrudes out, because the fireplaces in these buildings were built between rooms. So you got one chimney and two fireplaces. It basically was economics. And this building would have been laid out with a room and a cellar for a couple officers, and then fireplaces in between, one chimney, another small room, and another cellar. And then it had three distinct rooms that were laid out with back-to-back fireplaces, and those would have been the rooms for the men. The buildings were built to hold a company of French Marines, La Compagnie Franche de la Marine, were the soldiers who lived here, and it could have actually had officers plus 60 men in that building. But honestly, you know, we do know that at one point there was a census taken, I want to say in '58, that had 96 people here at the fort, soldiers, officers, men, women, a couple wives were inside the fort, and the historians that I've talked to feel that census was taken because there were so many men here, because there generally wouldn't be that many men. Even though this was a massive fort, and it was very impressive and all that, you know, as we've commented earlier, there wasn't a war going on here, wasn't the battles out here. It was a seat of government, very impressive. The Indians thought it was just the coolest thing in the world, from what the historians write. But that would have been one of the two actual barracks inside the fort. Now the whole idea of cellars is interesting, because a lot of the buildings have cellars. I've often, in fact, questioned that if the guard room or the guardhouse actually may have had a cellar, because every other building inside the fort has a big building where it has a cellar, but the cellars are kind of weird, because when the river comes up, the cellars fill up with water, and you know it would have done the same thing back then. So maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe being no levees, there wouldn't have been that much pressure, and it might have not been, you know, unless it actually flooded and then it would fill in. But anyhow, they all had cellars. They had cellars in the
cellars, dirt floor cellars.
Yeah, dirt floors that, from what the archaeologists have seen, and then stone walls going down. And when they did some work in one of the cellars over there, they found underneath original laid stone. They were gently removing them, and they were going to put them back in and everything. There was a fancy officer silver button laying actually in situ between the stones in the mortar, and you could just see that these men are working, and the officers stand over there, you know, doing what officers do, you know, pointing and saying,
"Don't put that stone there. Put it there."
Yeah, you know, that'll go there. But at any rate, that's just kind of one of those cool little stories. So this is the barracks, and then the entire inside of the fort was open, and that was the parade ground. That's where the men would march around. I tend to think that a lot of times it would have been, you know, grassy, weedy, you know. But of course they had guys here, so they, you know, they get out with size and what have you, and I'm sure kind of clean it up. But now let's head on down to